Donald Trump is losing support with his MAGA base. A majority of Americans think the country is on the wrong track, and voters prefer Democrats on a generic ballot. Those are the findings of new polls out this week. To discuss, we bring in Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science at Decision Desk HQ. So I think we have the overall approval-disapproval numbers here. You can see it right there. Trump 10 points down on that. What I found most interesting is the MAGA numbers. Compared to April, 5% of Republicans went from strongly approve to somewhat approve of the president's job performance. And according to the NBC News analysis, that downgrade was among MAGA voters specifically. What do you make of that shift?
I think a lot of that shift have to do with what's going on with Iran right now. A little bit back end of the tariffs, things like that. Look, Donald Trump is doing his policy. His policies are going to ruffle some feathers, especially some of his foreign policy decisions. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing here. But what we have learned about Donald Trump's base is they're resilient, if not growing, over the last 10 years. So what I'll be interested in is, does it still look like this 6 months from now?
Yeah, one of the things I'm interested in is the impact of the Doge on all of this. Back in April, 66% of MAGA voters said Doge was a success. Now it's down to 49%. I wonder if that's the impact of the Trump-Musk split. What do you think that means for the Trump coalition?
Yeah, no, I absolutely does think it. The Trump-Musk split was fantastically public, right? That's the way to put it. It was on Twitter. It was a reality show. It was a great season finale if it were on television. But on top of that, why did it split, right? Like, all the stories about Scott Bessent and Elon Musk arguing over $1 trillion or $2 trillion in cuts. Look, empirically speaking, based on what we've seen, Elon Musk didn't get anywhere near $2 trillion worth of cuts. We're seeing this rescission package that go into the House and Senate. It's only at about $10 billion. So I think that's what you're seeing. The voters are saying, hey, we were promised more out of Doge, and we're not necessarily getting it.
And some of those people from the Elon Musk wing of the party, Tesla driving, tech bros, may not be natural Republicans. And so when the split like this happens,
got to pick a side.
Quicker to leave.
Yeah, you got to pick a side.
Yeah. Speaking of a split in the GOP, I know we don't really have polling, I wouldn't imagine, on this yet because it's just happening, but what do you think Trump's actions vis-a-vis Iran and Israel are going to do to his numbers, especially, you already mentioned it with the MAGA base?
Yeah, look, Donald Trump has been America first. To quote him, he made up America first. I think Ronald Reagan might have an opinion about that, but he has clearly said this is what it is. He has made a point in multiple, during his first term, he's like, I keep people out of wars, I stay out of dumb stuff like this. And so the fact that we are entering into a phase where he's openly saying he might enter a war using United States forces, even against Iran, which universally not well liked, even though they're not well liked, doesn't necessarily mean they all agree that we should be using military force. So I think this is going to be a pretty big test of Donald Trump's support, depending on which way he goes.
He has some of these very popular figures of the right, thinking like Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson speaking about him against him on social media. It's a very volatile situation. It'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. I want to talk about immigration and the border. It's obviously been one of Trump's biggest issues and where he's had the most support. He still has support on that. But it's close. 51% approve, 49% disapprove. It's interesting, one of the numbers looking into it, only 9% of Americans right now say immigration is their top issue. I wonder if you think Trump's almost a victim of his own success here. He's virtually shut down the southern border, not many illegal immigrants coming across. So as it becomes less prominent of an issue, less voters think it's important, and that ends up kind of hurting him on that issue?
Certainly that's an issue. I think I heard the numbers, less than several hundred, maybe several dozen only coming over on a weekly or a daily basis versus thousands it was under the Biden administration. So that's clearly a big victory for him. But we saw some of these protests, around over the last week, and this poll kind of bisects how that is, especially with these ICE raids. I think, the surprising thing to me on this is that it is 51-49. I would have expected it to reduce a little bit as he goes after some of the farmers and some of the more people who aren't necessarily full-on felonious criminals doing the raping and murdering that he has talked about before. So we'll see where this ends up. But to your point, he might have had a success too early now.
There's a little bit of an on-again, off-again thing he's got going with immigration. I don't know if that
really
he was
going after
it pleases anybody, because if you have immigration hawks, they want him to go after anyone who's in the country illegally, where you have maybe more moderate Republicans who want him to go after the criminals. Right now, he might not be pleasing anyone.
Yeah, that whole tweet about, he tweeted about saying, hey, I'm going to pull back. I'm not going to go after the farmers and the hardworking restaurants. And then just a couple of days later, that order was rescinded to ICE. The back and forth here. And then again, under the surface, super inside baseball, a lot of people in Department of Homeland Security and ICE, there's been a lot of leadership changes, a lot of firings and new people moving around. Tom Homan's still going around saying he's going to arrest people. So I don't think this is the last we'll hear about it. And it's clear the Trump administration, while they may be suffering on some areas, they are not going to let up the gas wholeheartedly on what they're going to do with immigration.
I want to talk about the big, beautiful bill. This is the tax cut and spending package that's working its way through Congress. If you look at Democrats, Republicans, independents, combined support for Medicaid spending and tax cuts, it's like 70%. When you look at reducing the national debt, it's just like 30%. It seems like Americans want to have their cake and eat it too.
Yeah, every American wants to have that. What's kind of surprising me about the polling on this is I don't think the average American, the average voter really can tell you what's in the one big beautiful bill. And so any polling on that, I'm a little bit suspect, but the way you frame it is right. Do Americans want lower taxes? Yeah, that's going to poll pretty well. Do Americans want, expanded Medicare or at least not to cut those things? Absolutely. It's a benefit that they get already via their tax dollars. Do they want to cut the deficit? Conceptually, yes, but when you tell them to cut the deficit, they got to cut major things like Medicare and Social Security and some of these other big entitlements. That's when it gets less popular. So I think what we're seeing on the polling or the one big beautiful bill is not necessarily specific opinions on the bill, but more specific opinions around themes on the parties. I think we're going to see a partisan divide on this one.
One of the things I ask myself when I see these polls is, can we ever make Americans happy in politics? Or are they just in a perpetual state of disagreement? Trump's presidential approval rating, according to this new polling, 51% disapprove, 46% approve, not great. 55% of Americans say we're on the wrong track. But it seems like it's been like this for the past decade. Are we just in a state of our politics that it's going to be hard to get those numbers really much higher than where they're at right now?
Yeah, I think that's the underlying thing. I think this is the new norm, right? This level of vitriolic turmoil, disapprove, approve. What I would say, look, 51-46, this is better for Donald Trump at this point in his presidency than he was back in his first term. So while he's still a net -5 underwater, he's doing better than he was his first term. And I think that's largely based on, he's been able to solidify his base.
Yeah, and those numbers maybe not as detrimental to a president and a party as they would have been seen 10, 15 years ago.
Exactly. There are tens of millions of Americans who don't like him, and there are tens of millions of Americans who do like them, and they're not going to change their opinion at this point.
I want to ask you about the generic ballot. It's close, but it favors Democrats. It says here 45, 44%. It's actually more like 1.7% in the Democrats' favor. What do you think that says for races we're going to have in Virginia, New Jersey later this year? And I know it's early, but people are looking forward to the midterms next year.
I'm glad you brought up the 1.7, right? So we are in the game of inches in the generic ballot, right? And just so everyone understands, generic ballot is do you generically like the Democrat or the Republican brand, right? If you don't know anything about it, do you generally like them? And so what this is saying, of the people we think are going to show up and vote, they generally favor a generic Democratic candidate over a Republican by 1.7. Academics will tell you that the Democrats, if they want to have a good election, so say New Jersey, Virginia, they need to be above 1.5 and really need to be above 2.5 to have good midterms. Now, this number is going to fluctuate a lot. It's not going to fluctuate by 2 or 3 points. It's going to fluctuate by 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 as we get more of this, but it's something we're closely watching. But this bodes pretty good. If I were the Democrats, this is the number I'd want to see. I'd rather see it in October of 2025 because we still got a long ways to go. This is a good number for them.
Yeah, a lot can happen between now and then. First things first, we'll have to do those races in New Jersey and Virginia later this year. That'll give us a good indication. Then we'll move into next year. We'll continue to follow this. Scott Tranter, always great to have you on. Thanks so much for your insight.
Thanks for having me.